The horse leaned its weight into the harness and dragged a hoof before finding purchase on the road. Leastways, now was downhill. At the general store, where the store owner's wife seemed to expect him, the wolfer checked his route and bought a bite of tobacco. To make town in daylight is what he would have liked, to drive his hunting gear through the center, see the people turn to watch him pass, nod to those who waved, and tip his hat at those who cheered. But so be it. The wolfer drew up in front of the lighted farmhouse. He wrapped a wolf fur around his shoulders and placed a wolf hat on his head, the kind of attention to detail that persuaded folks they were getting what they'd paid for. Morning found the wolfer in the woods, a mile or more above the farm. He had scoured the way for the carcasses of fallen prey, tracks, droppings, any sign at all. He found nothing. A leveling in the hillside and a small clearing in a stand of hemlock provided him with a place to make camp. Afterwards, he walked 2 miles in each of 4 directions. Once he came across the carcass of a steer, which might or might not have been wolf work. It was rotted too far down to tell. At supper the night before, the wolfer had entertained his patron with stories of wolves he'd trapped as far afield as Dakota and Nebraska. At first, he pretended to wish not to be drawn, but after he had finished a plate of stewed oysters and cornbread, he began to speak, slowly and with many pauses, to allow his small audience the pleasure of urging him on. His reputation had flown ahead of him, he knew, and so he told selective stories of his battles with outlaw wolves, and some of those stories he embellished a little, and other stories he borrowed outright. The wolfer accepted a small glass of port. His hosts were not a rich family, but well-to-do enough, having diversified early into tanning, and began on the story of the 3-toed outlaw wolf of Harding County and the queen wolf of Colorado, who he had not himself trapped, but an account of whose execution he had on good authority. Roped and quartered by 4 horsemen riding in different directions, yes, sir. 200 Christian folk had gathered to see the captured wolf brought in on the back of a cart. The wolfer's father had been a wolfer in this part of the land. The wolfer had been born into the town. His father's work disappeared with the last of the wolves, but by then his father had been an old man. As a young man, the wolfer headed west, and in his time had done any and every kind of job there was, worked the railroads, ridden herd, fenced and mined ore, all for other men. Once he'd grub-staked his savings in a cinnabar claim, worked at it 2 years hard before he gave the whole thing up. The mercury, when it came to it, had been worth less than his time. Soon after, he learned there was wolfing work around, and learned, too, the kind of money a rancher was willing to pay a wolfer to keep his land clear. And so he bought himself a new skinning knife and took up his father's trade right where the old man had left off. From the brow of the hill, the wolfer surveyed the land on the opposite slope. What once was pasture and lush fields of wheat and corn now was weeds and white pine saplings. The farm owned by the wolfer's host had lost 6 sheep to the wolf, so they said. Another farmer had woken to find 8 of his sheep dead, a 9th kicking in her death throes. This had been going on for a couple of years now. Though nobody had seen a wolf, nevertheless, a wolf was said to be responsible. Wolves were coming back, folk believed, and said so. Had merely been waiting out the years for the opportunity for men to lose their vigilance. For his part, the wolfer thought it likely a feral dog was at the root of it, but he kept his mouth shut. Afternoon. The wolfer shot a buck, cut off and wrapped the haunches, dragged the remainder of the carcass behind his horse to a place about a mile from his camp. He took a file from his inside pocket. He shook a few of the white crystals into an empty file, added some snow, shook the solution until the snow melted, and checked it against the sky. Then he